on foreign relations, according to Senator Ping Lacson.
Philippine economic growth hit its weakest pace in 14 years after the economy expanded by just 4.4% in 2025, missing the government's revised target.
First in the news, court documents show that former Congressman Zaldico was in Stockholm, Sweden earlier this month. Here's the report.
The Supreme Court has published the petition filed by former Ako Bicol Party List Representative Zaldico against the Office of the Ombudsman. Documents indicate that on January 15, Ko was in Stockholm, Sweden. That's according to his notarized records from the municipality of Nacka. Interior Secretary John Vic Remulla said Ko may be using a foreign passport, allowing him to travel freely across several European countries. The challenge of the Philippine authorities is that they still need a copy of Ko's foreign passport before Interpol can act. Obtaining it requires coordination with the Portuguese government.
So, kinukuha namin yung copy ng passport and then we're going to put it through Interpol na para hindi na siya makalabas ng Portugal at kung lumabas man, mahuli natin.
Despite his frozen assets in the Philippines, authorities say Ko allegedly smuggled millions of pesos abroad using cryptocurrency. These funds may be sustaining his life while hiding overseas.
Criminal talaga. Marunong talaga sa krimen. Pati escape route ng pera, escape route ng bahay niya, kung saan siya titira, alam niya. Escape route ng pera, meron siya. More than a congressman, more than a businessman, he was a criminal.
At present, Remulla believes Ko is in Lisbon, Portugal, and is under continuous monitoring by an intelligence team. If Ko wishes to negotiate with the Philippine government, he must first return over 58 billion pesos, approximately $1 billion, allegedly taken from the public.
Kasi ninako niya sa tao yun, dapat ibalik natin sa tao.
The Philippines is also coordinating with Sweden to track Ko's possible location, while President Bongbong Marcos remains determined to apprehend fugitives and bring them home to face justice.
Hindi natin masasabing may frustration ng Pangulo dahil alam po niya na ang mga namumuno sa mga ahensya ng gobyerno na tumutugis sa mga fugitive ay nagtatrabaho ng ayon sa kanyang utos. Kinakailangan lang po siguro ng talagang mas pursigihin pa ang paghahanap sa mga taong nagtatago sa kamay ng batas.
The Supreme Court has upheld its decision declaring the articles of impeachment against Vice President Sara Duterte unconstitutional. The unanimous decision also dismissed the motion for reconsideration filed by the House of Representatives seeking to overturn it. The case involved the fourth impeachment complaint transmitted to the Senate on February 5, 2025, which the SC ruled was barred by the one-year rule under the Constitution.
The Supreme Court en banc denied with finality the motion for reconsideration filed by the House of Representatives. It affirmed that the fourth impeachment complaint transmitted to the Senate on February 5, 2025 was already barred by Article 11, Section 3, Subsection 5 of the Constitution.
Because the motion for reconsideration was denied with finality, the House cannot appeal the Supreme Court ruling. However, authorities said the House may file a new impeachment complaint against VP Sara beginning February 6 when the one-year bar expires.
It was denied with finality, and the court said that no further pleadings will be entertained. It will be after the one-year bar rule from the transmission of the articles of impeachment last Feb 5.
Several lawmakers voiced disappointment following the Supreme Court's decision to uphold its ruling declaring the impeachment articles against Vice President Sara Duterte unconstitutional. Mobile journalist Amy Atienza with the report.
Various lawmakers expressed their disappointment over the Supreme Court's decision on Thursday that it will sustain its initial ruling, calling the impeachment articles against Vice President Sara Duterte as unconstitutional. The SC denied the motion for reconsideration of the lower chamber due to quote-unquote factual errors. ACT Teachers Party List Representative Antonio Tino expressed this dismay over the announcement.
Well, nabismaya tayo sa naging decision ng Supreme Court. Ibig sabihin nito, magiging mas mahirap lalo ang pag-impeach sa mga pinakamataas na opisyal.
But the fight continues. Tino said that filing another impeachment complaint against the vice president is already considered, which may only happen starting February 6 after the one-year bar rule.
Gayunpaman ay tuloy pa rin ang pag-file muli ng impeachment complaint laban sa Vice President kaugnay sa pagwaldas ng 612.5 million na confidential fund. Hindi po magbabago yan. Sinusulong po natin ang panawagan ng taong bayan, lahat ng sangkot dapat managot. Magsimula tayo sa pinakatuktok, sa Presidente at sa Vice-Presidente.
Mamamayang Liberal Party List Representative Laila de Lima also pointed out that the SC ruling rests on technicality. In a post through X, she said, quote, wala pa ring nalinis na pangalan. On the other hand, House Speaker Boji D respected the decision of the Supreme Court. Through a statement, D considered the vigilance involved in the process of impeachment, especially to a high-rank official. South Cotabato Representative Ferdinand Hernandez likewise said that the lower chamber is focused on performing its constitutional mandate and reaffirmed their commitment to upholding democratic principles, institutional respect, and the rule of law. Kapatid Amy Atienza, we are One News.
Now joining us, a constitutional law expert, Attorney Jennifer Reyes. Hi, Attorney. Thanks for joining us again. It's nice to see you.
Hi, good morning to everyone, and thank you for inviting me to your show again.
All right, Attorney, let's get right to it. No? In simple terms, why do you think the Supreme Court found the impeachment process as interpreted by the lower house for VP Sara's complaint as unconstitutional?
Well, first off, the Supreme Court, in its latest decision, ruled that since the first impeachment complaint against VP Sara Duterte on December 24, 2025, was not included in the order of business and referred to the proper committee within the constitutional periods mandated. Hence, it's already triggered the one-year bar rule under the 1987 Constitution. This means that the fourth impeachment complaint, which was transmitted to the Senate during that time, was already invalid or unconstitutional because it means that it is already a second impeachment complaint within a period of 1 year, which is exactly prohibited by the Constitution.
So in other words, Attorney, the interpretation of session days or while in session was a crucial part of the Supreme Court's decision-making process.
Yes, you are correct, Mr. Diego. In this latest Supreme Court ruling, it stated that for the purpose, because it's a general rule when we say session days, right, of the House, it means that from the time it is called to order until the session is adjourned, regardless of the passage of time. However, here, the Supreme Court clarified that for purposes of including an impeachment complaint in the order of business within 10 session days and referring it to the proper committee or the Committee on Justice within 3 session days thereafter, when we say session day, it should mean a calendar day where the House holds a session or a plenary session for that matter.
Right. But, Attorney, don't you think that when the Supreme Court redefined the meaning of a session days, and is this not dictating the precise timing and method by which the House must, interpret their own rules? Kumbaga, ito po ba ay yung sinasabi nilang judicial overreach?
A beautiful question and a tough question. But in my humble legal opinion, yes, I believe that it is quite a judicial overreach since the House of Representatives must have been given a wide range of discretion or a certain leeway to interpret or how to interpret its own internal rules. However, since the Supreme Court in interpreting the Constitution must be complied with, or its decisions must be complied with. Although, of course, I believe in this famous saying that you can criticize the people or the one whom you revere, right? So, in my humble opinion, it is a judicial overreach. But at the end of the day, everyone, including the highest officials of the country, must comply with the Supreme Court's resolution.
Right.
So, moving forward, does this now make a valid impeachment complaint more difficult to file rather than those that are being filed just for the sake of immunity?
Yes, that is a great point, because the Supreme Court laid very detailed guidelines as to the procedures which must be complied with before an impeachment complaint can be initiated before the House of Representatives and before it can be transmitted to the Senate. The impeachment process now becomes quite complicated. But on the positive side, this recent resolution of the Supreme Court, since it gave or spelled out the exact guidelines, then the House and the Senate now has a benchmark or a certain guide so as not to repeat this kind of being rendered unconstitutional, meaning the articles of impeachment they initiated or they transmitted will no longer be considered as unconstitutional because they now have guidelines which they can follow and must comply.
Attorney, it's interesting you mentioned the word benchmark and guidelines. Does this mean that let's take into consideration the Senate, the archive complaint? Does it mean that they have their own leeway to decide whether to accept the Supreme Court's decision or not based on the guidelines they have received, or do they have to follow this?
They have to follow this. Just like what I mentioned, the Supreme Court as the, well, of course, interpreting the Constitution is mainly a judicial function. And now that the Supreme Court has spoken, it spelled out the guidelines. The Senate, even if it is a co-equal branch of government, and the House of Representatives, for that matter, they must still comply with the said decision because we are not talking about the supremacy of the Supreme Court. We are now talking about the supremacy of the Constitution, which the Supreme Court construed or interpreted.
Well, last point on that, but a lot of people have been saying that regarding the Senate, we have to remember that it will be put to a vote, if ever, and merely the senators will be guided only by the ruling, but not necessarily their votes will have to be patterned after the Supreme Court's ruling. So at the end of the day, it's still going to be a political exercise.
Yes. The Constitution merely mandates that 2/3 vote, right? 2/3 vote of the senators will be sufficient to remove or oust an impeachable official. With respect to that, the Senate has the sole discretion on that. The Judicial Department or even the Supreme Court cannot dictate as to the voting of these said senators.
Yeah. All right. So the question here also is that did the Supreme Court act as the guardian of our Constitution or as a co-legislator in terms of redefining itong 10 session days? And with that as well, since we are talking about internal rules of the House of Representatives, meron din po bang possibility that the House of Representatives could redefine or reword their process, their procedure in the House since sa kanila naman ito?
Regarding your first question, I believe the Supreme Court, of course, in good faith, wanted to interpret the Constitution or to guard the Constitution. But just like what I mentioned a while ago, in my humble opinion, it is quite a judicial overreach, right? And as to your second question, whether the House can reword or redefine their internal rules, yes, they, of course, have the freedom to reword or redefine their own rules of impeachment. However, they must be guided or they must comply with the guidelines set forth by the Supreme Court in their decision. They must be in accordance with the guidelines ruled by the Supreme Court in this case. They cannot contravene the said ruling.
But having said that, what happens now to the previous or old cases that that were guided by the old rulings, yung Francisco versus House of Representatives, diba? Kasi sabi nga nila, affected lahat ng mga rulings na yan because of this recent ruling ng Supreme Court.
With respect to the previous impeachment complaints filed against VP Sara Duterte, because of this recent development, then they are dismissed already. They can no longer be, discussed again legally.
Right.
However, it is worthy to emphasize, and our kababayans must listen to this, that in the Supreme Court decision, on page 2, page 7, and page 45 of their decision, the Supreme Court underscored that they are not absolving VP Sara Duterte of any charges against her.
Right.
Meaning, the House can still initiate an impeachment complaint against VP Sara Duterte on February 6, 2026 and onward. So this decision is not an impediment. It is not an obstruction for the House to again file a new impeachment complaint against VP Duterte.
You're right, but I'm talking about all the cases, the old ones.
Precedents.
Na yung mga precedents, yung mga sinundan ang House, Francisco versus House of Representative na ruling that, because for the longest time, yun yung sinusundan ng House of Representatives. Only that this ruling yesterday na nabago yun.
Oh, okay. Because in the decision, the Supreme Court likewise mentioned that the petitioners were invoking the doctrine of operative facts. All right? Because under the doctrine of operative facts, if you will declare a certain law or a governmental act unconstitutional, there are certain effects of that law before it was declared unconstitutional, which cannot be nullified. However, in this case, the Supreme Court also clarified that the doctrine of operative facts cannot be invoked at all instances. This can only be invoked if the nullification of the effects of the law which was declared unconstitutional will result to inequity or injustice. Moreover, it stated that parties who are responsible for the non-compliance of the rules cannot invoke the doctrine of operative fact. Only those parties who acted in good faith.
So,
No, but the question here is now, Attorney, regarding the question a while ago about the lower house rewriting the rules, can they rewrite the rules in gray area in such a way that it skirts the gray areas of the previous rulings, and they could test the Supreme Court once again and have a new precedent?
For me, that is an unwise move if they will do that, because it will result again in further delays. Then it will become a dilemma to the effect that no impeachment complaint will, be pursued in the future just because they will be adamant or they will insist their own rules or they will redefine their rules again. So the wise move here for me is just to comply with what the Supreme Court stated as guidelines. They can pattern their new rules on impeachment on the said guidelines so that they will no longer, or the articles of impeachment they will later on file, will no longer be attacked with respect to its constitutionality or validity.
And also for the benefit of our viewers, what happens now to impeachment complaints against one certain official that could be days apart? What does the House need to do now in terms of consolidation? In effect, if there's a stronger complaint that will follow a weaker complaint, can the House wait and consolidate both instead to avoid the immunity being triggered by the weaker complaint?
Well, the consolidating of impeachment complaints, the Supreme Court already stated that it is within the discretion of the House of Representatives whether or not to consolidate several impeachment complaints. Also, it emphasized that there is no particular hierarchy with respect to the impeachment complaint, which must be prioritized by the House. Even if the impeachment complaint was filed by a private citizen, or even if the complaint was filed by at least 1/3 of the House of Representatives, there is no hierarchy. It can even consolidate the two if it wants to, as long as it will comply with the constitutional periods. For example, a first impeachment complaint was filed and it is sufficient in form and substance, and it was included in the order of business within 10 session days, and it was referred to the Committee on Justice within 3 session days thereafter. That completed process, it will now trigger the 1-year bar rule, meaning no additional impeachment complaints can be filed against the same impeachable official within that same year.
Of course, we are talking about the longer way of filing the impeachment
Longer
complaint.
mode.
Oo, the longer mode, ano. Pero it's also different when somebody filed it through the easier mode, which is yung endorsed by 1/3 of the House of Representatives. Tama po.
Yes, that is correct, darling. And also, just as a reminder to our, congressmen and congresswomen, if it will be filed, if the impeachment complaint will be initiated by at least 1/3 of the House of Representatives, please take note that you need to give a copy of the said articles of impeachment with the attached evidence to all the members of the House during the plenary wherein you will file the said impeachment complaint, because the Supreme Court stated that it is not only those 1/3 House members which has the power to initiate an impeachment complaint. It is the whole House. So, as a matter of courtesy, and also as a matter of informing the constituents of all the House members, then all the House members must be given a copy of the articles of impeachment draft and the evidence appended thereto.
Now, Attorney, with regard to the issue naman ng impeachment complaint against the President, do you think this is on the right path as within the ruling of the Supreme Court?
Well, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they have stated that since the first impeachment complaint was already included in the order of business and referred to the Committee on Justice, then it already triggered the 1-year bar rule. So let us see if this impeachment complaint will, undergo the proper process before the House. Will they comply with the guidelines crystallized by the Supreme Court in its latest decision? And will it be transmitted to the Senate so that trial shall forthwith proceed? But of course, if the House deems it insufficient in form and in substance, they have all the right to dismiss the said impeachment complaint.
Right? Very well said. Maraming salamat po sa inyong oras, constitutional law expert, attorney Jennifer Reyes. Thank you for joining us. Now we'll be back with more stories after the break. Keep it here on One News. Good morning. You're still watching News and Views here on One News. A strong majority of Filipinos continue to distrust China, with nearly 8 in 10 identifying it as the country's greatest external threat. That's according to a recent survey by Okta Research. The poll conducted from December 3 to 11 found that 60% of respondents were either strongly or somewhat distrustful of China. Only 13% said they trust China, while 26% remained undecided. Meanwhile, about 79% of adult Filipinos see China as the greatest threat, up from 74% in July last year. In an interview with The Big Story, Okta Research President Professor Ranjit Rai said public sentiment favors addressing tensions in the West Philippine Sea through diplomatic engagement, supported by a credible military presence and the continued modernization of the armed forces of the Philippines.
The majority of the Filipinos see West Philippine Sea as a serious issue. Majority of Filipinos think, number one, that we have to assert our rights in the West Philippine Sea, but we have to assert it, again, a majority in our surveys also say that we have to use the first step, which is to exhaust all diplomatic means.
Senator Amy Marcos is set to be replaced as chairperson of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, according to Senate President Pro Tempore Ping Lacson. Here is the report.
Senate President Pro Tempore Ping Lacson has announced the removal of Senator Amy Marcos as chairperson of the Committee on Foreign Relations. She will be replaced by Senator Erwin Tulfo. Marcos will instead lead the Committee on Constitutional Amendments and Revision of Codes, currently chaired by Senator Kiko Pangilinan. All these changes are expected to be taken up in the Senate plenary session next week. Before this, Senate President Tito Soto had floated the possibility of a shakeup in the chairmanship of at least one committee in the upper chamber, following the resumption of session after a month-long legislative break. Marcos was among the senators who refused to sign a resolution condemning the Chinese embassy's continued criticism of Filipino officials. She later filed a resolution urging temperance, stressing that free speech and the position of officials defending the country's sovereignty should not be hindered. Marcos warned that harsh statements could be strain bilateral relations, particularly on issues involving maritime rights. She added that diplomacy should be led by the Department of Foreign Affairs, and that engagement with other countries should avoid insulting or disrespectful language. Meanwhile, Malacanang said declaring foreign diplomats as persona non grata should only be considered a last resort. Recall that some senators previously broached the idea of having Chinese diplomats either replaced or declared persona non grata, after they criticized Filipino officials for expressing sentiments on the West Philippine Sea.
It also carries tremendous implications moving forward, such as reciprocal action or other countermeasures in other areas, which is why it should not be made lightly and decided only with careful and clear thought and preparedness for how it will shape the Philippines' strategic interests moving forward.
Joining us now is political observer Earl Pareno. Good morning, Sir Earl. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning sa mga nakikinig din.
Sir Earl Pareno. All right. So how significant is this move politically and symbolically to replace Senator Amy Marcos as Foreign Relations Chair?
Para sa akin, reflection lang yun ng broader na conflict between the majority and the minority. Of course, nagiging sentro ngayon ang West Philippine Sea at ang actions ng ilang Chinese embassy officials, no? Mga statements nila na some of the senators perceive as unfair, no? And unwarranted actually. Pero nagpo-push back nga ang Chinese embassy, tapos talagang tinuloy-tuloy din ng Senate through a resolution. But I agree that declaring diplomats as persona non grata is a prerogative ng presidente dahil siya yung nag-accept niyan as representative of a sovereign state.
Right.
At malaking implication yan given sa trade relations natin with China, with OFWs, about 500,000 ata ang OFWs sa China. So hindi natin basta-basta yan magawa dahil sabi nga ni spokesperson Castro, may reciprocal action din yung gagawin ng China. No? At may implication sa atin, hindi lang politically, hindi lang sa West Philippine Sea, but also sa employment and economy ng Pilipinas. So, kailangan yan ng sensitive handling. And I think isa sa not decisive, but isa sa mga institutions sa Pilipinas na mag-play ng key role dito ay ang foreign relations. And the present Committee on Foreign Relations ng Senate. At ang key committee na to ay hindi dapat hawakan ng isang opposition figure
Right.
because mahirap i-align ito sa policy ng Malacanang. Kaya sa tingin ko yun yung main reason ba't pinalitan si Senator Amy.
Yun nga, Sir Earl, madami nagsasabi, itong decision daw hindi nakakagulat. It's because initially it was intended to be, from the start, this committee was intended to be aligned with the foreign mandate of the President, which is, sabihin na natin US-centric, no? And then the statements have escalated in the last few days. So do you see this right now as a policy reset on the President's agenda, or rather a correction on an error from the start?
I think it's a correction. It's a continuity of a foreign relation policy of the President na pinapatibay niya lang yung coordination ng bawat agencies maski co-equal branch kayo ng government. So kailangan yon pagtibayin dahil we could not present a policy na ang local players ay maingay na against this policy. So it should be aligned, no? It should be aligned. Everything should be aligned, not just with the executive, but even with the both houses of the legislative department.
Well, before we move forward to another topic, I would also like to ask you regarding of course, the issue that sinasabi nila one of the reasons why she's being replaced, Senator Amy, as the chair of the DFA, Foreign Relations Chair in the Senate, is because number one, she is not part of the majority, and this committee, diba, ay dapat ay kapartido ng mga nasa majority. And number two is because she didn't sign the resolution filed by the Senate regarding the issue with China.
Sa tingin ko, actually, yung resolution ng Senate regarding China, yung pag-declare na persona non grata ng ilang embassy employees ng China or officials ng China, ay sa tingin ko kailangan i-review yon ng mga senators, no? Na it should not be a resolution requesting the President for the declaration of that persona non grata, but it should be something of conveying the sense of the Senate that the executive should do something regarding the statements of some Chinese embassy officials against our position sa West Philippine Sea. Let other entities, Chinese entities, do that, but not its diplomatic officials. Kasi nagkakaroon yan sila yung representative ng Chinese government dito So nagkakaroon yan ng pagka-official din ang dating. If that's the case, then parang mahirap maantanggal ito. Mahirap ma-de-escalate kung mag-declare ka ng persona non grata. So I think it should be reviewed. Pero at the same time, yes, agree ako that the Senate Foreign Relations Committee should be handled by somebody na may alignment with Malacanang's, with the President's foreign policy.
Tama ka, Sir Earl. Actually, we're all expecting that, no, that somebody friendly to the foreign policy of the president will be appointed. With that impending, do you see now more policies and treaties or mutual defense pacts with other Western powers to increase? Kasi wala nang balakid, ika nga eh.
No, I think the Philippine government, Malacanang has been doing that, no? Expanding, strengthening parang relations with other countries, Japan for instance, even Australia and even South Korea, no? To expand relations and to put defense as one of the priorities of this bilateral relations. Magpapatuloy yon. Pero sa tingin ko, maski nandoon si Amy, hindi naman siya talaga balakid for these policies, for these agreements to continue. Ang ano lang na medyo publicly media, mas noisy kasi ang opposition to criticize the administration at nagkakaroon ng official face kasi pag isang agency ng government such as Senate, no? Isang co-equal branch, no, ng executive ng government ang mag-criticize sa policy na yun. So, sa ngayon, may alignment, so the noise can be turned down, no? Parang medyo hihina ang magiging impact nito pag wala siya sa committee.
Parang unified voice na tayo, no, sir, no? Parang isa na lang ang tono
In a
natin.
sense.
Yeah.
Yes, in a sense, yes.
Yeah. Well, on another topic, sir, I would like to ask also your opinion about the recent ruling of the Supreme Court regarding the impeachment case filed against Vice President Sara Duterte.
Ang impeachment case naman na yun ay sinasabing sa timeline ng Supreme Court, sinabi na sa first ruling ng Supreme Court na pwede lang kayo mag-file ulit ng impeachment case by February 7. At ito ay kinatigan doon sa Supreme Court ruling yesterday, no, the other day, no, na tama ang decision na inilabas ng Supreme Court sa ganung sa pag-file ng impeachment. So, hindi pa rin ito tinitigil na by February 6, pwede na mag-file uli ng impeachment case against the Vice President.
Kumbaga, go ahead po, sorry. Go ahead.
So, parang tuloy pa rin ang laban. Dahil respect naman, nag-file ang House ng MR just to clarify things. Pero, hindi naman sila nag-pursue ng pag-file uli ng bagong impeachment case. No? So, ina-expect ng lahat, by February 7 onwards, may bagong impeachment case na i-file sa House against the Vice President.
Right. Kumbaga, procedure ang in question here regarding that ruling, not taking away na kung innocent ba siya or not doon sa complaint against her.
Yeah, it's procedural. No, it's about timing. It's about interpretation of the provision of the law that pwede lang mag-file ng impeachment case once every year. No, so kung may na-file na this has something to do with preventing yung parang guluhin mo lang ang buhay ng tao. So you file and file ng mga impeachment case against that official. So once a year, yun yung provision ng batas.
Pero yun nga po, medyo hati po kasi yung opinion ng mga legal luminaries or mga constitutional experts regarding this decision because sabi nga nila, nagkaroon ng judicial overreach by the Supreme Court deciding on the procedures, internal procedures of the House of Representatives. So your take on that?
Yeah, correct. Pero ang interpretation na yan is only with regards sa first impeachment case. Hindi naman nag-overreach sila ang Supreme Court, I think, na bawal na after February 6 ang pag-refile ng mga impeachment cases, no? Pinayagan naman 'yon, pero yes, I think ang decision kasi na pinonente ni Associate Justice what's that? The first
Yonen.
case, no?
Yonen.
Si Marvick
Yonen.
Yonen, no? Associate Justice Yonen ay sinasabi lang ang pagbilang ng days para ma-determine kung 1 year, may na-file na ba na 1 year or before 1 year ito final, etc. etc. No? So, sa tingin ko, lininaw lang naman. Hindi ako abogado, ano?
Yeah.
Pero sa tingin ko, may sense din naman yung inilabas ni Senior Associate Justice. Yun, and itigil na lang muna, pero pagka-expire nitong deadline na ito, yung limit na ito, ay pwede naman mag-file ulit. Actually, na-experience din naman yun ni Associate Justice, di ba? Yung pag-file ng mga case against sa kanya noon.
Sa kanya, yeah.
Kaya sa tingin ko, yun yung prevent niya na ma-experience ng mga ibang officials.
Pero in a related matter, sir, no, na moving forward, meron tayong 2 complaints against the 2 highest officials of the land, si President Bongbong Marcos and Vice
Right.
President Sara Duterte. Ang tanong dito, how does these optics na halos the first time in history magsasabay ang complaints for the 2 highest officials in the land, how will this affect yung political landscape both locally and internationally? And also sa panig, of course, ibangga na rin natin, sa panig ng China, they will say na, kita mo, there is a power struggle, there is a power vacuum in that country.
Yung sa China muna tayo, ang sagot dyan, same to you naman. May
Same
power
to you.
vacuum, may power struggle din naman nangyayari sa kanila. So I think hindi nila i-erase yun. Pero ano yung political landscape? Kasi everything now is about 2028.
Yes,
Right.
correct.
So, talagang pinupush ng bawat kampo na sila ang pag-uusapan. At ang pagdidemolish ng bawat camp ang objective nila ngayon. One of the objectives ng magpa-file ng impeachment case against the Vice President ay hindi na siya makatakbo ulit. So, it will create a big problem for the Duterte camp. Yung naman, yung pag-file naman against Bongbong, no? Dalawa yung cases na
Yes, oo.
final din against Bongbong. Ang first is parang ostensibly para maprotektahan siya na wala nang mag-file uli. Pero inaccept naman nila ang filing ng other groups against Bongbong. So I don't know paano i-decide yon ng Committee on Justice and eventually the plenary ng House, no? I-handle niya ba to, i-exclude niya tong medyo serious na impeachment case, yung parang ilang days na antala or na delay on sa first case. I don't know, that's interesting to monitor, to watch. Pero lahat nga 2028 ang patutunguhan nito. So sa etong cases na to, again ako nadidismaya ako dahil parang ang Pilipinas kasi ngayon ang politics natin nagre-revolve around 2 camps lang eh. It's
Yes.
either Duterte or Marcos,
That's
Marcos
correct.
Duterte. There should be an alternative for the people, no? Outside doon sa dalawang camps na to.
It's interesting you mentioned, sir, about the
Yes.
alternative, no? Ang sinasabi nila, the only way to beat, which is the primary goal of a lot of people, the Duterte camp, is to see the President, Bongbong Marcos, makipag-alay sa alternative, sa center or sa liberal. Like an alliance between Ontiveros or Aquino with the Marcos would essentially create a new unity that would challenge the Dutertes.
Yeah. I think parang pagkakaalam ko, may mga ibang sections sa tawagin na nating progressive bloc na yun yung idea na makipag-alay with the Marcos camp. May iba naman na ayaw makipag-alay sa Marcos camp, kundi gusto nila i-consolidate, i-strengthen yung position nila outside these two dynasties. No? Parang may hanggang this year pa, I think mag-play out kung ano ba talaga ang mamamayani. Dahil ang iba kasi ang thinking diyan pag one-on-one lang, kaya nila i-beat ang Dutertes. Pero pag maraming mga, let's say, three-way fight or four-way fight, mas lalaki ang chances ng mga Duterte. So, ganun yung parang equation na tinitignan nila. Pero sa akin kasi, there should be a clear parang position ang mga outside nitong dalawang camps ngayon, main camps ngayon. There should be a clear position sa mga plans and programs sa government for the people. This is not about anong dynasty ang magro-rule dapat sa Pilipinas, kundi anong grupo at anong program ang mas makakapaglingkod sa at makakapag-solve sa problema ng Pilipinas.
Well, very
Graft and corruption, especially. Economic development.
Exactly. Well, very quickly na lang po, Sir Erlano, don't you think also that somehow the way that the administration is handling the investigation about the flood control mess, somehow it rocked the boat of the political alliances, no? Na nakita nila na paano to, kumbaga, na-appreciate ng publiko, kaya tinitignan nila na, teka muna, pag-isipan ko muna kung saan ako aalyansa itong mga politiko na to.
Yes, I think ang handling ng administration na to ay kulang pa rin doon sa investigation. Pero kung may maipapakulong sila at alam nila siguro ng Malacanang ito na ang hinihintay ng mga tao ay magpapakulong ng mas maraming big fish. No? So kung hindi mangyayari yan, wala na actually magiging mukha ang administration sa mga tao. No? So gawin niya 'yon. Paano niya gawin 'yon dahil it will hurt even some of the administration's allies, no? Pero kung gagawin niya 'yon, makikita ng mga tao na may resolve siya, no? Na i-push talaga ang anong tama, which is to prosecute those who stole people's money.
Ayun. Okay.
All right. Thank you for that and your time.
Yeah.
Political
thank
observer
you.
Earl Pareño, hope to have you back on the show.
Thank you. Now, in other news, the defense of former President Rodrigo Duterte has filed an appeal with the International Criminal Court, or ICC, challenging a recent decision denying his release from pretrial detention. Duterte's camp argued that the court erred in refusing to consider medical reports from a neurologist and neuropsychologist which point to deteriorating health and cognitive impairment. They claim this decision violates Duterte's right to a fair hearing and have renewed their call for his immediate interim release. The ICC has scheduled former President Duterte's confirmation of charges hearing from February 23 to 27. Vice President Sara Duterte, who is currently in The Hague, said her father has no plans to change his legal team despite the recent setback.
Tinanong ko si dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte, gusto mo ba palitan at hindi ka ba satisfied? Sabi niya, hindi palitan. Pero meron siyang mga instructions na ibinigay kabahin sa legal team. So, hindi ko nasabihin kung ano yung mga instructions dahil ano naman na yun, hindi na mahalaga.
Don't go away because we're not done yet. Please stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching News and Views here on One News.
Philippine economic growth slowed to its weakest pace in 14 years, excluding the pandemic. The economy grew by just 4.4% in 2025, way below the government's revised 5.5% to 6.5% target. This is the slowest full-year expansion since 2011, though it contracted 9.5% in 2020 during the COVID crisis. Meanwhile, growth in the fourth quarter eased further to 3%, pulling down the full-year figure. This was also weaker than the revised 3.9% growth posted in the third quarter. The weak economic performance was partially caused by the flood control scandal, which affected investor and consumer confidence and slowed public spending. With growth losing momentum, questions are now turning to monetary policy and whether more rate cuts are needed.
What kind of a GDP outcome then would justify, say, a 50 basis point cut on February 19th?
We wouldn't really recommend that because it could look like they're panicking. But for the whole of this year, they could do as much as 50 basis points, Kathy. Again, watching closely whether inflation will remain within target because we really think that growth will continue to disappoint. So this coming May, when the first quarter numbers are reported, most likely than not, Kathy, we will be seeing still a disappointing print. No? Probably not as bad as the third and fourth quarters of 2025, but still well below the potential of the Philippines.
In sports, Filipino tennis star Alex Ayala bowed out of the Philippine Women's Open after a 6-4, 6-4 loss to Colombia's Camila Osorio in the quarterfinals. The defeat ended Ayala's campaign in her first professional tournament appearance on home soil. Despite the loss, Ayala urged fans to continue supporting the event. She will next compete in the Abu Dhabi Open in the Middle East after receiving a wildcard entry into the main draw.
There may be no snow in the Philippines, but the country has a contender on the Winter Olympic stage. And for Filipino skier Francis Ceccarelli, this moment is a dream come true. Para bigyan ng mukha ang balita, Mobile Journal, Denise Valdesancho.
Napatunayan na ang husay ng mga Pinoy sa iba't ibang larangan ng sports. At ngayon, isang kababayan natin ang sasalang sa Milano Cortina 2026. Sa much-anticipated Winter Olympic Games o kilala bilang Milano Cortina, magpapakitang gilas ang 22-year-old Pinoy skier na si Francis Ceccarelli. Ang kauna-unahang Pinoy na nakakuha ng quota spot para sa torneo. Ipinanganak sa Quezon City si Francis, pero lumaki siya sa Italia. Sa kanyang Olympic debut, mas pinili niya raw na i-represent ang pinagmulan, ang Pilipinas.
I'm so happy. I'm so happy because it's my first Olympic game. I'm so really happy for participate and for my country, you know.
Malaking parte ng hilig niya sa sport ang kanyang ina na dating professional skier.
I started when I was 8 years after my Italian parents adopted me. We start really fast. After the adoption, my mom take me out for the snow. Yeah, teach me everything for skiing and my grandpa same.
Sa likod ng prestihiyosong sports na kanyang ginagawa, naikwento sa atin ni Francis na simple lang din naman ang kanyang pamumuhay abroad.
I am a simple Pinoy, you know. I like spend my time with my friends. I like dancing, you know, and with my friends. I like drive my car, you know.
Sa ngayon, nasa Bosnia siya para sa races at paghahanda sa Winter Games na gaganapin sa Pebrero.
Yeah, it's really it was my dream. Like why you are, you know, pressure if the dream is arrive, you know. Finally. I wait everything, and so thank you for support, for view me. I'm so really proud for everything and for this interview and for every people really.
What a time for Philippine sports. Patunay na anumang larangan, kayang-kaya nating makipagsabayan. Mga kapatid, Mobile Journal, Denise Valdesancho po, hatid ang mukha ng balita.
And that wraps up today's episode of News and Views.
Join us again on Monday. I'm Angela Lagunsad Castro.
And I'm Angelo Castro III. Kapatid, we are One News.
All sides, all the time.